£60 million. That's how much money you'd have if you invested £1 in Bitcoin in 2009. But why do we even need Bitcoin? Like, what's wrong with normal money? That's the question that I want to answer in today's video. To understand why we need Bitcoin and cryptocurrency more generally, we first need to understand why we actually need money, because it's only when we see the problems that money tries and potentially fails to solve, we can see why we may need cryptocurrency to help step in and solve those problems too. So money has been around in one form or another for the past 5,000 years, but before then there was a bartering system in place. Basically what this means is that in early human history, people were trading goods and services directly. So if I was the local shoemaker, for example, and I wanted to go and buy let's say some chickens, then I'd have to figure out how many shoes I needed to make in order to buy those chickens. And this is pretty much the same for everything that I wanted to buy. So if I wanted to go buy some clothes or some book or some food, then I'm going to have to work out how many shoes I need to make as the shoemaker in order to get those things. Now, you can probably see why this bartering system wasn't exactly ideal. Like, if I wanted to go and buy something, I'd have to carry around a big bunch of shoes with me in order to get that thing that I wanted. And if I'm low on stock, if I'm low on shoes, I'd have to go away and make those shoes before I can buy anything. And just imagine how this would actually apply in modern times. Like if I wanted to go to London and buy a penthouse flat, like I'd have to figure out, for instance, as the goat farmer, how many goats does a London penthouse flat cost me? Like that just seems like a complete logistical nightmare to sort out. But for those of you wondering, a London penthouse flat may set you back about £4 million. A goat probably costs about £200. So you're probably going to need about 20,000 goats to buy a London penthouse flat. So in short, this bartering system wasn't great because the goods weren't particularly portable or practical. Everyone kind of had a different selling point, and with certain items that people exchanged, especially like perishable goods like wheat, they basically found that the things that they were exchanging died after a certain time. So it's not great having a monetary system where the thing that has value has a certain life limit, has a certain amount of time before it expires. And that's what they were finding with this bartering system. The solution then was to create a form of currency. To begin with, this currency was still some form of easily traded item like animal skin or salt or weapons or things like that. But in 600 BC, the Lydian civilization, which is now based in modern day Turkey, coined what is believed to be the first official currency. So what made this so great? Well, as trade became more complex and people were starting trading between more distant communities, they needed some form of money or currency that was going to be trusted and recognized between these different communities. In particular, creating a metal coin as the basis of currency meant that all of a sudden there was money that was, one, durable, like it wouldn't just corrode or rot like the perishable goods that they had been trading throughout the rest of human history. Secondly, it was scarce, like you can't just grow this money on trees, it had to be properly mined and minted. Like if we were just going to go trade grass or we were going to trade something that we could just grow out the ground, then that's not going to work because anyone could just then grow that thing and therefore have money. So we needed something that people couldn't just grow and create themselves. It had to be something that was going to be difficult to create and difficult to get your hands on. And thirdly, it was divisible. Like you could have different coins of different values, and that made it really easy to buy different goods of different value. But although these coins are clearly more portable than goats, they are still quite heavy. Like these were small but fairly chunky pieces of metal, so carrying these around all day still wasn't great. And this is why in many places they created these coins with holes in the middle of them so that they could put all the coins on a piece of string. So with much larger transactions, they ended up exchanging these coin strings instead of just the individual coins themselves. So the price was based on the string rather than on the individual coins alone. Now, this was clearly workable, but still not great. So it's taking humans quite a long time to figure out what is the best way to buy and sell goods. So in China in about 700 CE, they actually decided that instead of having to lug around all of these coins, instead you can leave these coins with a trusted agent and they will give you some sort of like paper receipt to acknowledge that you've left this money with them. And this was really the first step towards paper money because over time, instead of exchanging coins, they just exchanged these pieces of paper which represented the amount of money they had left with these trusted agents. Then Marco Polo then later brought back this idea to Europe because he realized that trading these pieces of paper was far more convenient than trying to trade and lug around these large pieces of metal like gold. This led to something known as the gold standard, which basically means that for every unit of currency, whether that's the pound or the dollar or whatever, that was going to be backed by a certain amount of gold. And backed in this context means that the government promises to give anyone that amount of gold who presents that certain amount of currency. So for example, if the dollar is backed by an ounce of gold, if you then went to the bank and gave them, $100, they're going to give you 100 ounces of gold back. Supporters of the gold standard argue that it provides more stability in currency markets because the government can't just go away and print more money, because if they went away and tried to print more money, then there would be a risk that they won't have enough gold to back it up. But this setup really didn't work very well, and in the 1930s, both the UK and the USA abandoned the gold standard.
So you're puzzled about all this business about going off the gold standard? Well, I don't wonder. It is a bit complicated.
The reason for this is that the gold standard really restricted the government's ability to use monetary policies like printing more money to control inflation, as they'd need to back that increase in money with an equivalent amount of gold. So this is why we're left in a position today with fiat money, where government-issued currency is no longer backed by any commodity. Instead, we have to trust our government to determine how much money should be created and exactly for what purpose. While this technically should give the government more control over government policy, it really hasn't exactly gone to plan either. US national debt is currently at $30 trillion. So even after all the faff of human history of trying to determine the best way to buy and sell goods, our monetary system is still far from perfect. But if we look at all of human history and we see what has worked and what hasn't worked, we do actually get a pretty decent picture of what an ideal monetary system should look like. In particular, for money to be an effective medium of exchange or store of value, it kind of needs to have the following 6 characteristics: durable, divisible, fungible, portable, recognizable, and scarce. So as we've already talked about a couple of times, it needs to be durable. So if you're going to buy something and pay with something, it needs to be something that's not going to erode or rot or otherwise be subject to the fickle whims of Mother Nature. So if you're a desert wandering Bedouin, you might want to think otherwise when it comes to using unpasteurized milk as your money. So using something like a metal coin might be a better alternative. Second, it needs to be divisible. So it needs to be something which we can easily split into different denominations of value, so that if we're going to go and buy a Lamborghini or buy a kitchen mop, it needs to be just as convenient to use that money to buy either of those 2 items. Again, this is why coins have worked so well. Third, it needs to be fungible. And what this means is that basically it needs to be possible for us to exchange one unit of that currency for another unit of the same currency and have absolutely no impact whatsoever. So if person A has $50 or £50 and person B has $50 or £50 and they exchange those 2 things over, that should have no impact whatsoever. Person's A $50 is worth and represents exactly the same thing as person B's £50 or $50 does as well. Fourthly, it needs to be portable. Like carrying around our goats or our shoes or our chickens isn't particularly effective because it isn't easy to transport those things around with us. Whereas metal coins or paper notes are really easy to transport around with us because they fit very nicely in our pockets. Fifth, it needs to be recognizable. So every time we go somewhere, people need to recognize and understand that what we've got has some form of value, and they trust that what we've got represents that true value too. Finally, it needs to be scarce. So in other words, there needs to be a limit to the currency. And so this is why things like grass and leaves won't make great currency, not just because they're perishable, but also because you can go get those things in almost infinite supply if you just left your house. And it's also the problem with fiat currency, because with fiat currency and the system we've got at the moment, the government can basically go away and print as much money as they like. So fiat currency isn't exactly scarce. So although our existing fiat currency and monetary system does almost perfectly fit the 6 characteristics of sound money, it doesn't quite fit in there either, because we're basically left in a situation where the government can print as much money as they like, and we've got to kind of pray that they don't just completely screw things up.
We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%.
We're down over 16%. Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
So what's the solution to this? This is where cryptocurrency steps in. In 2009, the very first cryptocurrency was invented by someone or a group of people that goes by the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. And this first cryptocurrency is known as Bitcoin. By far the most revolutionary aspect of Bitcoin is that it requires exactly zero trust in a central authority, which, as we've seen, has caused huge national debts caused by things like the financial crisis and the COVID pandemic. Instead, it takes that control out of one pair of hands, the central government, and gives it to a dispersed network of users, none of whom have ultimate control over the monetary system. Now, this is certainly a huge plus for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but how does Bitcoin stack up against our 6 properties of sound money? So firstly, is it durable? Well, it's certainly durable to the extent that we can't rip it up or destroy it like a physical good, but it's also durable to the extent that there are so many users maintaining the network, it would take a seriously catastrophic event to knock it all out. So yes, I would say it is very, very durable. Secondly, is it divisible? Well, Bitcoin has its own special denomination to 8 decimal places, so the smallest amount that we can transact when we're using Bitcoin is 0.000000001, I think, Bitcoin. So it's clearly divisible because we can use much smaller denominations than just 1 Bitcoin. Thirdly, is Bitcoin fungible? Well, every single Bitcoin unit has the same functionality and quality. So yes, if we were to exchange 1 Bitcoin unit for another Bitcoin unit, we'd essentially be getting exactly the same thing. Fourth, is it portable? Well, Bitcoin is just data after all. Crypto is just data. So as long as you've got your phone or a USB or even a QR code on a piece of paper, you're going to have your Bitcoin with you. So yes, it is very, very portable. Fifth, is it recognizable? Well, yeah, again, it's very recognizable, and because every single transaction is authenticated using a very complex process of cryptography, it's very easy to validate the authenticity of the transactions taking place. And finally, is it scarce? Well, there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin in circulation, and the process in which new Bitcoin are mined, in other words, the process in which new Bitcoin are created, happens at a very predictable rate. This means that there will never be a sudden tsunami or influx of Bitcoin into the monetary system, causing inflation. As a form of sound money then, Bitcoin really does seem to hold up well. It's no wonder that there are over 1 million active Bitcoin addresses or users that currently believe in cryptocurrency and its future. The final frontier for Bitcoin, and the one thing that's really stopping it from taking off, is its volatility. So although the price and popularity of Bitcoin continues to increase, it's still heavily susceptible to fluctuations in its value. And this is simply because Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is still in its infancy. So if you get in now, you're still early to the party. But as more and more people own and use it, there's every reason to believe that cryptocurrencies will become more stable over time and become and prove to be the ultimate form of sound money.